This is a malted milk biscuit. You can't get them in America. Well, you probably can at like a specialty store, but they're absolutely delicious. Nice with coffee. No, I'm not little. This is a really big mug. So anyway, hello everybody. Welcome to another episode of Petty Cultural Tribalism. Today we're going to look at who drives better, Americans or British. American culture is hugely dependent on the automobile because it's a massive country and the public transport sucks a big hairy fat one. For example, I took a train from Chicago to Los Angeles once and it was 9 hours late pulling into Dallas. It was so late they terminated the service. There was no point in continuing because everyone had missed their connections. Amtrak literally shrugged and gave up. And they put us all on buses with free sodas and free sandwiches to complete our journeys. Imagine a train being 9 hours late in the UK. There'd be rioting in the streets and official investigations and cascades of resignations. Tabloids would explode. They'd probably bring back the death penalty. Now, the UK is relatively small and has an exceptional public transport system. Some people might disagree, but trust me, the best systems in the world are only marginally better, and most are a hell of a lot worse. So in Britain, cars are relatively unnecessary and are actually kind of more of a status symbol. So as for who the better drivers are, you'd expect the Americans to be a shoo-in, right? Well, let's find out. Americans didn't invent the car, but there's no other country in the world where the car is so important. The entire infrastructure is built around the car, which is one of the reasons I think that public transport is so poor, unless you live in New York or Chicago. In the rest of the country, if you don't own a car, you're kind of considered part of some unofficial underclass, somewhere between homeless people and child pornographers. When I took my driving test in Texas, I was absolutely appalled at how easy it was. I literally answered a few simple questions and then took a drive around the block with a state trooper in the passenger seat. It took less than 10 minutes. I already had a UK driver's license, which was the acquisition of which was an exponentially more taxing experience. And for some reason this wasn't transferable. Understandable, I suppose, in the days before the internet. You know, we actually had to physically send pieces of paper around the world. Can you imagine? How crap is that? I was a delivery driver for a few years in Texas and racked up 50,000 miles a year for 4 years. And in that short but deep immersion, I saw some terrible driving and a few deaths. And curiously and unconnectedly, 2 presidential motorcades. This is when George W. Bush was in power. And that was quite impressive to see, where you get stopped by a motorcycle outrider and literally 100 black SUVs rocket past at 50 miles an hour. It was a sight to see. I owned a couple of cars in Britain too before I went to university and then emigrated. So I have a couple of years of driving experience on British roads and far more experience of American roads, at least from the vantage point of a driver's seat. So how do we determine who the better drivers are? Well, we can compare the infrastructures for starters. Roads in the USA tend to be much more wider and sweeping in the turns and junctions because they were built for cars, not horses or people on foot. This makes driving easier, but it also means skills develop slower, deteriorate quicker, and inattention becomes more common. But the real measure of driving skill, as you'd probably imagine, is the rate at which we crash. According to a World Health Organization study in 2013, Americans crash about twice as often as Brits. The UK actually has one of the safest driving records in Europe, which I didn't expect, having cycled 8,000 miles in the country over the last few years. And this stat is per vehicle mile, not per capita or some other metric. So Americans can't use the "we drive more" excuse. So I guess that's the definitive answer. Brits are better at driving.
That is sensational.
In fact, they're just about the best in Europe. Who'd have thought?